Well, hello everyone. Thank you for joining this webinar sponsored by Apporto. Today, we are here to talk about how to really understand and convey the value and the message of what a virtual computer lab might bring to a university campus. And really, I think I want to pause to say maybe the thought was coming into this, well, I would love to see numbers and calculations, which we'll get a little bit of a glimpse today. But I think the real goal today is just to understand that conveying a message of value sometimes has to deal, many times has to deal a lot with influencing and understanding your audience and conveying a message in the way that might be heard the best. And that's why we created the panel that we have today. We actually have a regret from James. He is pulled into an urgent topic at his university, but we do have some responses that Connie will be reading out during our time together today. Beyond that, we also have Chris Cruz and Fernando who are joining us from Fresno State. Fernando, I'm going to read a bio quickly so we can get a quick background. Fernando Parra is an assistant professor of accountancy and the director of Institute for Family Business at Fresno State. He obtained a PhD in international business with a focus on information systems and a graduate certificate in accounting from the University of Texas at El Paso. Fernando has played a key role in supporting small to medium-sized businesses with business software and security solutions in the medical, retail, and legal industries. Fernando was influenced by his father's career as a professor, and he sought an education and was inspired to have a meaningful impact on students. Fernando is committed to inspiring students to fulfill their potential as community-focused business leaders. When not at work, Fernando enjoys being a great parent of 3 Ewoks. I believe those are dogs. Is that correct?
Right. That's
yes.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you, Lama.
You're welcome. And Fernando has presented peer-reviewed research presentations on teaching strategies, enterprise systems, cybersecurity, strategy, and other information security issues in several forums around the nation. His background will be well appreciated during our conversation. Chris Cruz is the Apporto lead at Fresno State, but he also serves as an IT specialist for the College of Health and Human Services. I'm sorry, the College of Social Sciences. Sorry about that, Chris. Really what that means is he's the director of IT overseeing that area. For Apporto specifically in virtual labs for the university, Chris led a team to research, test, and understand the total cost factors before choosing a specific virtual lab option, including cloud-based and on-premise. Chris, along with the CIO, spearheaded the implementation of Apporto at Fresno State during the pandemic during 2020 and beyond. The research started well before 2020, of course. Fresno State continues to foster and grow awareness of Apporto to its users. The service is now part of Fresno State's strategic technology toolset offered to faculty, students, and staff for teaching, learning, and work. For myself, I was the former CIO at Fresno State for 6 years. I'm going to be starting a new role just in a couple of short weeks as the CIO for water and wastewater at East Bay Municipal Utility District in the San Francisco Bay Area. Exciting new industry, but I'll be sad to be leaving higher education. James, who's not with us today, he serves as the Chief Information Officer at Rollins School of Public Health at Emory University, which is the 4th ranked school of public health in the United States. James has over 25 years of leadership experience in technology service operations support distributed across a wide range of industries, including manufacturing, consulting, software, and higher education. James's technology experience spans several disciplines and includes an extensive record of accomplishment such as change leadership, customer service, loyalty analytics, and continuous improvement. James earns a Bachelor of Science degree from Kennesaw State University and holds an MBA from Georgia Tech with a concentration on technology management. James lives in Kennesaw, Georgia with his wife and 2 sons. The background, I think, is helpful because we know that you, as you are our participants in this webinar, you come from a diverse set of backgrounds, universities, what you represent, where you are in the university setting, the role you play, even in a central IT setting. Sometimes the central IT team on a very decentralized campus can make things very different. So what we're trying to say is there's really no one solution. There's no one formula to say this is how you should advocate for any specific technology in your university. So today's conversation hopefully will be a starter, and we encourage you to use the Q&A that you have to present your questions. You can use the chat as well, but I think if the chat becomes a little cluttered, the Q&A will be the best part to share a question that you might have about something we're discussing. And Connie will help moderate those questions for us. Connie will also help read some of the responses from James as well. And before we get started into really the meat of this webinar, I'd like to ask Connie to help conduct a really brief poll, because I'd like to get to know you better in terms of where you're coming from. So Connie, if you could throw the prompt up and I'll read it, and we'll leave it up for just a brief half a minute or so. So to really understand and maybe fine tune how we share and how deeply we go today, I wanted just to ask, does your university currently have a virtual computer lab in existence that's in service to students and faculty? Maybe not and, but maybe it's an or. So please go ahead and fill out that poll. We'll give you another 15 seconds. Okay, let's close the poll and share the results with each other, please. Perfect. Okay, kind of what I was guessing at. So roughly half-half. And this is helpful because as you're coming here, there's a great question. What can a virtual computer lab do that I can't do? Or maybe is it a supplement? Is it a replacement? And for those of you who are here, there's a possibility that you've been using one-time funding or limited time funding to support your virtual computer lab. And maybe the question is, how do we sustain this? How do we make the case where we really need this as a strategic roadmap for information technology? So let me start with perhaps a story of sorts. Fresno State explored Apporto. Actually, I'm sorry, let me back that up. Fresno State explored virtual computing for many, many years. It started with the Citrix implementation on premise. We then went into exploring Frame. We also explored VMware and AWS and Azure and many, many other tools, and including Apporto as well. Many of those companies allowed us to do small to medium-sized pilots, but it was kind of a mix of how we proceeded. My approach when I was there at Fresno State as CIO was really to try to build partnerships. So I had many conversations with deans, and many of them had to pay for their own computer labs. There were well over 1,000, I believe it was 1,400 lab computers across the campus that served 25,000 students. And the question was, how do we afford to continue to upgrade these computer labs, maintain and upgrade? And is there a better solution? Because we can't keep these labs open 24 hours a day. Students will come in and come out, and they'll maybe not have what they need to do their coursework, especially as finals come around or other projects. So really, it became not necessarily the deans to have that conversation. They were interested. They had no money. And maybe that's similar, maybe that's not for your university campus. The conversation really then had to be, what do the president, the provost, the CFO, what do they care about most? But of course, let's not forget those who really support the work of technology. What do our IT specialists care about? What do our network people care about? What do our CISOs or ISOs care about? And those are all important. So when I went out to really think about how do I make the case to sustain something like Apporto or a virtual computer lab for the entire campus, whatever that might be for 10 people or for 25,000 people, I had to make sure I would adjust my case depending on with whom I'm speaking with. If it was the president, he was most influenced by stories. And I used a story that was actually meant or used in and received by another program we had going, which was a program to help provide technology to students such as iPads, but also make the classrooms more of an active learning environment. But the story went something like this. There's a working student, and every day though, she would, between her classwork and her job, come back to campus. And she would go to the library because that was the only lab she really had access to. She wasn't in the right college or course where they had other lab access. And she would stay all the way until midnight every day because she had no computer at home. Maybe the internet wasn't that great either. She would stay every night to midnight. And when we were able to provide a computer and iPad for her, she was very grateful, but she still had to come to the labs because it may not have had all the software that she needed. That story moved my president deeply in two ways, at least, mainly in two ways. One was to continue to support the loaner programs that we had, but the others was to really to think about our labs and our access to labs and how we could make that more inclusive. So there's a really big underlying diversity, equity, inclusion aspect, serving underrepresented minorities and communities, those who just had more need. That story resonated with a lot of people. Now, with my CFO, she cared a lot about, okay, how are we going to pay for this? What might we need to change in our service models? What's the actual dollar, the hard dollar return on investment? So Chris did a lot of work, and we tried to understand, okay, let me try to come up with that kind of a solution or answer. My provost cared a lot about the mission of teaching and learning and supporting our faculty, and Fernando will share some stories in just a moment. But so we had to then fine tune our message in sharing about why Apporto is so important to us in a different way. And so with every group of people, we had to really advocate different. With students, they wanted to know that their hard-earned tuition dollars and the hard-earned state dollars were used in an appropriate manner. So with students, we advocated in different ways as well. I share that all with you because as you think about what's the most important message, sometimes we forget it's not just showing that we can save money. And sometimes we aren't necessarily saving money, but there are intangible values. There are those that are really the softer values that become much, much more important. We talk about student success very frequently in many university settings. Not all of them. At Stanford, we didn't really talk about student success. We kind of assumed student success. But student success comes in different forms. And how we make our students more successful, how we empower our faculty and our staff, those are the stories that we really need to understand and be able to tell. And sometimes, to be very honest with you, as technologists, we may not think of those first. But I'm encouraging you to really think deeply about that. So today, as I shift away from me talking so much, I'm going to invite Chris and Fernando, and also we'll hear from James as well through his written responses. And we might have Anthony, who's the CEO and founder of Apporto, chime in on some important topics. We might have a little bit of collateral deliverables presentations for you in terms of just a spreadsheet or some slides. So that's what we have planned today. But I do encourage you that if you have a question, specific questions, please do not hesitate to do that. So, okay, Fernando and Chris, please feel free to unmute yourselves. I have some questions for you, and in whatever order, and feel free to even share more if there will be something helpful. So the opening question is, in your roles on campus, how have you most effectively advocated for technology to support students and teaching and learning?
Well, let me jump in, Orlando, and thank you so much for the invitation to share my thoughts and my experience in using this wonderful tool. If you look at Fresno State's population, about 66% of those students use regular PCs or laptops. 25% of them use Macs. About 5% use Chromebooks, and there's a good 3%. 3 to 4% that have no device. So they're really just working out of their phones and they use the labs. Now, most of those computers are working well, but there are some exceptions, right? There are individuals, students that really don't have access to the latest version of their laptop. Some of those are 5 years old, et cetera, and they don't have the right resource. As an accounting information systems professor, I bring and introduce to the classroom plenty of software packages that require a PC environment. And I found myself frustrated with the process of getting all my students to have access to that software in their own computer so that they could actually get the most out of the class. So, we started with, installation instructions, which, as you know, students are not always focused on doing everything at once. So you would have 80 different questions of, I got stuck in this part, when your time as a professor should be dedicated to not just installing a bunch of software for everyone, but, actually getting them to maneuver through the software itself. So I did lose a lot of time in the past, and I became, it was very challenging, I guess. We did have the ability to use VMware, so an installation of Fusion VMware for Macs and PCs, but that really didn't resolve the issue with the students that did not have a Mac or a PC. So you still have almost 10% of the population with no device. And some of the Mac users simply were not able to install this parallel installation of their operating system. So I certainly became a strong advocate for us to seek a solution that would provide students with the resources to access the software. And gratefully, I was able to pilot Apporto a few years back, and it was an instant relief to be able to just guide the students to say, log into this website, this is your new desktop, and the software's already there. So let's start from minute one of the classroom. Let me get started with how you actually use the software and not waste time and divert your energies in finding the installation of all of these different resources. And mind you, that is still valuable, but that's not the purpose of what we want to get from our students. So from an educator's perspective, I think it was important for me to make sure that nobody was left behind. And during the pandemic, this became more critical, right? Students were not able to access or get the resources. The prices of devices became just, for some, became inaccessible. But this also gave me the opportunity to have real-time support. So with Apporto, I've been able to support students remotely at any time by looking at what they're working on while I'm teaching the class. So I'm able to lecture and at the same time look at how they're actually applying the lecture and their software. And I can jump in and use their screen to demonstrate something that they have, that needs troubleshooting, right? So I'm able to use examples of students that have done something wrong or that have done something well, so that I can showcase it with the rest of the class. So that's been really critical for me to be able to navigate everybody's screens, as opposed to me walking around the classroom and not being able to show everyone else, hey, John is working on this particular problem, and he found a way to do this better. Let me showcase it to you, right? So this is something that Apporto can do. There was also a question of academic integrity that really started troubling a lot of our colleagues and in the faculty, because there was no way to really look at what students were doing. So this Apporto tool would give us the ability to, again, oversee and supervise some of their efforts. And while this is not an academic integrity safe, it does serve as a deterrent from students to use or to break some of the rules. Now, from the student's perspective, I think that's where the most value comes in. Obviously, I've been really happy to be able to maneuver in a way that I have never been able to maneuver without this technology. But for students, it opens up a great opportunity. I think that even before the pandemic, in most fields, I can't name a single field that has not been impacted by technology in the last few years, especially during the pandemic. And students are able to access software now that is going to help them through their career. So these are software packages that are going to be relevant to their future careers. And if they don't have access to them, then they get left behind. So I've seen students who had struggled in the past with maneuvering their software. But with Apporto, they've been able to collaborate with other students, with the professor. They have the installation ready to go, and they have access to that. So those that were not able to access the devices in the past now have a lab that they can access 24/7. And so there's no more barriers, or the barriers to distance of those students that live an hour away from our campus do not have to plan a whole day just to come and do their homework or to continue learning because they have a commitment somewhere at work. And so that has really been transformational, in my opinion, in my perspective, for students. So they have gained their the ability to learn more effectively, and they have also been able to access software, and I think that we become more inclusive as an institution to make sure that we are not leaving anybody behind. So that is how I was able to be an advocate for this, and thankfully Orlando, serving as the CIO of our university, was able to grant me this opportunity to pilot this, which became, the standard going forward after the pandemic.
Thank you, Fernando. I just want to pull something that I think is a very important point for our audience today. One, the partnerships between faculty and the technology team, I think, is so important. Not every campus will do that in such a deep fashion. I think Fresno State does it very well, and I've appreciated working with you, Fernando, and many other faculty in the Senate and other places. So just kind of a quick, I'm smiling a little bit because so many of our faculty know the great tools and really want the best for their students. Almost all faculty want the best for their students, but they don't have funding. So there's a hierarchy. So if you're a lecturer, you almost kind of get no say in some ways. If you're a faculty member, there's different, you're part of a tenure track. And so there's different kind of a hierarchy, but all of that really needs to go through. Usually the question is, how can I do this? And the response sometimes, or many times, is speak with your department chair, or maybe speak with your assistant dean, maybe speak with your dean. And then eventually maybe that gets to possibly the assistant provost or the provost, and then maybe one day the president. But that's where the voice of our faculty and the voice of our student, those are so, so important. Sometimes when I was there, one of our previous presidents, he would respond to every single Twitter tweet from our students, every single one, and email. So that means that he was listening. And you will have to get to know your university president or chancellor, your cabinet, your provost, to understand what motivates them, what drives them. Because if you can understand that, you can understand best how to influence that discussion about this tool is so important. I just wanted to throw it out there. Chris, please share your thoughts.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, I definitely attest to that. Fernando was very instrumental in helping us pilot virtual machines and Apporto. So thank you for sharing that. And then also, in terms of the question, going back to, how you most effectively advocated for technology, I would say, and how you help decision makers. There's a lot of information and there's different perspectives, there's different angles. So I'm gonna talk about the perspective I took, or at least one of them. And I initially started off by, talking to the colleges and seeing, what their outlook is, what their perspective is on virtual labs as opposed to physical labs. And what I found is there was a lot of hesitation, there's a lot of resistance, just because capital expenditures and operational expenditures in the education environment, you may not be guaranteed, a budget this year is going to be the same next year, or if there's a recession, they hesitate because of that. So one of the things that was a possibility, and this is right before the pandemic, was somehow pulling all the colleges within the universities to share the cost of a virtual environment. And this was brought on too because the physical computer labs at Fresno State were aging, and a lot of the colleges may not have the budget initially to refresh all of these computers. Some of them are medium level machines, small level machines, or even high end 5,000 plus machines. And if you look at it from a total cost perspective, there are many factors that you have to look at. And I think like understanding total cost, not just from the hardware perspective, but also the virtual machine perspective. Even though you have a subscription to a virtual machine service such as Apporto, there's other overhead costs that you still have to account for. Staff, for example, support training, coordination, and making sure that service is suited and configured for your environment. Things like license servers, software, licensing itself, those all have to be managed, and you have to work with all aspects, pretty much all aspects of your technology services team to make it work and operate with a third-party service. So both cases, there's going to be operational maintenance costs, and you want to account for both of those and then compare the total cost from your first year to your typical refresh, which is usually 4 years, depending on your environment. And some of the things I'd like to talk about in terms of, how did I calculate my total cost or our total cost at Fresno State for physical computer labs? And some of these factors also play into a virtual environment. I mean, not all of them will, but there are the other aspects that will be the same. And you can use that and base it on your environment based on what salary levels your staff are at. So factor that into your calculations. So going down the list, I just like to mention several of them. Understand the number of lab computers you have at your environment. We did a quick look, one of our reservation systems, and we had about, at least the documented ones, about 1,000 machines that are on campus. So we took that number, rounded it up. It was about 900 something, and we rounded it to about even 1,000 just to look at what the total cost would be with that number as well as per unit. So things like expected service life, whenever you refresh your physical computer labs, training and support costs for the physical environment, energy consumption is something that people don't really think about. And I know the colleges don't really think about it that way, just because when I spoke to them, they say, we don't pay for electricity in our budget, but Fresno State does as a whole. And these machines consume energy. And many times, 24/7, you have to account for how much that's going to cost. Maybe during the day, if you have solar panels, maybe that energy is offset. But at night, when maintenance and patching and scanning actually happens, when the machines are not being used, those machines are still on when you're not producing electricity. So factor that into your calculations. Equipment upgrades. Sometimes you buy computers, and you may have software that requires more hard drive space or more RAM. You may have to upgrade that equipment during its life or service life. Operations and maintenance, those are also factored in there, as I mentioned. And then think about product disposition. So the cost is not only installing and maintaining the physical computer lab, there's also cost in getting rid of them or even transferring them. There's cost in that in terms of moving them, imaging or re-imaging them or wiping them, secure wiping them, recycling and disposal costs. So factor that aspect in there for your calculations. Some other considerations I'd like to talk about in terms of understanding the risks, right, between physical and then also your virtual environment. Staff and resources. Right before the pandemic, we were trying to move to a pilot, Apporto, and hopefully somehow have everyone pitch in to provide that service, and maybe even reduce some of our physical costs. During the pandemic, when it happened, it was pretty much we had to move to it because campus was locked down. Students couldn't access the software they needed, so we had to have some type of service to provide that access to the software. So other things you want to consider when you implement it is staff and resources and availability. You know, how much workload do your technical staff already have? And is this something they can implement on top of what they're already doing? And then also consider the risk of, if you decide whether it's going to be a third party such as Apporto or a virtual machines just in general, in-house, you know, do you have the key talent? And then do you have the ability to sustain that key talent? Just because it's very competitive, the market's very competitive. And if you have other areas that are offering, you know, higher pay for that talent, you may lose that talent. And if you have something in-house, that jeopardizes or increases the risk of implementing something in-house. So look into that aspect of it as far as the risk, and also understanding your total cost. And then the other aspect that I'd like to talk about is in terms of the total cost calculations and how many licenses you would probably be best suited for your campus. Understand your peak current usage. So I'm going to show another, I'm going to show a slide here, if you don't mind. Let me know if I'm running over time, Orlando. I can definitely modify here. There's a lot of data.
I'll walk our audience through this, but feel free to throw in the slide. I want to just share while he's putting that slide up. Apporto has been creating a spreadsheet that we may not have time to look at, but just know that there is one available. So if you're thinking about Apporto or just a virtual lab in general, please reach out to us and we will help you walk through what the spreadsheet is in thinking about different factors. Chris Cruz has created another version for the Fresno State in the design and implementation that factors in well over 80 different factors in calculating hard costs in comparing physical and virtual labs. And you're welcome to reach out to Chris as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is from my angle, my perspective, and you know, put in your factors, but this is one of the perspectives I took in terms of, you know, comparing the two, and it's always going to depend on your mix, right? So even though we have 1,000 computer labs on campus, not all of those machines are the same. There's going to be different levels, right? Just like Apporto has different instances or levels as well. So you have your small, medium, large, and then your GPU. And then you want to kind of like compare those, what's equivalent to hardware in your physical computer lab. And then you can adjust the number of licenses and compare those costs to your physical computer lab. So what I did here is I took the total costs after 4 years, and each of those dots represents a different level and also instance. So a different level in hardware, the blue line indicates, or the blue dots here with the line indicate computer hardware, and they're different levels. So the x-axis here, small, medium, large GPU, indicates the level, and then the hardware equivalent. And then on the y-axis here, you have the cost. You can kind of see, comparing the two, what's equivalent to Apporto. We have a lower end machine here, what's equivalent to Apporto in terms of total cost after 4 years. If we start moving up, we have the medium level, total cost after 4 years. And then other factors you want to think about is what type of software you have. Sometimes software requires higher end, sometimes it doesn't. So this is just on this example here. So your example may be different, but you kind of get the general idea that, okay, so the total cost for hardware is going to be higher generally than compared to an equivalent virtual computer lab. Now, if you compare it 1,000, and from this perspective, let's say 1,000 machines to 1,000 seats or licenses for Apporto, it may not be cost effective that way. But what was interesting to talk about is even though you have 1,000 machines, doesn't mean you need 1,000 seats. You just need to understand your peak concurrent usage and then understand that, hey, you only need 200 to accommodate 1,000. Because at any one time, at least from our calculations and our data, any one time or hour in a day, we would have a maximum of 180 students using computers of those 1,000 that are just sitting there. So we initially had 250 here, and then after looking at it and just monitoring the usage, we're actually less than 200, and 200 would be sufficient. So we reduced the number of seats, and you can see there, based on these numbers, these dots correspond to these numbers here. There's hardware 4 years and virtual machine 4 years, and then the mix of different hardware based on this example, and the equivalent virtual machine seats here. So if you can see here, you don't need 1,000 seats to match 1,000 sets of hardware. And from this perspective, this is a more efficient use of funding, just because you're not having to have 1,000 machines sitting there, creating costs, operational costs, maintenance costs, and you're only subscribing or paying for what you're going to need and use. So this is just an example of the way we looked at it. I'm sure there's other ways, and hopefully this helps someone from this perspective, because I know there's a ton of data out there, and we had to consider a lot of different perspectives and aspects. And I think if I had this data in the beginning, it would have definitely been very helpful.
Thank you, Chris.
So that's the information I have.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. I think there could be a whole other webinar and a whole other discussion, and others may be interested to find out more and dive in a lot more into detail on how to calculate the hard costs. I want to focus us on the remaining questions we have, but I do want to hear James's response. So Connie, let's start with that question again. In James's role on campus, how has he most effectively advocated for technology to support students and teaching and learning?
So James's response is as follows. In our post-pandemic operating model, flexibility is among the most important aspects of the student experience. Our on-campus learning spaces must accommodate a wide range of teaching and learning experiences, positioning spaces for handling large in-person groups, effectively leveraging technology for an optimal remote experience, and everything in between. Advocating for this model is facilitated by shared needs and experiences. In other words, focusing on the convergence of student and faculty needs paves the way for effectively advocating for the most flexible solutions.
Thank you. And that's such an important point. And we know that the pandemic will change, has changed, and will continue to change how we just do things at a university level, and especially in the teaching and learning area. So the flexibility part is so important, and I think is a tool that helps with virtual computing, virtual applications will need to be part of the university's tool set to help support its students. For our second question, let's start again with James's response. How have you, James, helped campus decision makers understand the value or return on investment for tools like Apporto virtual computer labs? And I'll do the second follow-up right after you share, Connie.
Okay. Interestingly, our most significant challenge in helping our constituents understand the value of technologies like Apporto has been at the most fundamental level. How can virtual labs be described to non-technical audiences in a relatable way so that people understand what it is and why it's important? Once people understand the technologies like Apporto enables us to deliver the experience of computer labs over the internet with no physical equipment, no space needs, with accessibility from anywhere on the planet, with almost any browser-capable device, the value proposition becomes very clear.
Thank you. Chris has had a really good analogy that I think as we try to fine tune our message, and again, think about your audience, what works with them. Is it a story? Is it data? Is it something else? Chris's analogy tried to make it so that it's a little more relatable to today's audience, and his was about Netflix. And you can go into Netflix and kind of pick and choose what you want to watch, and you're streaming a movie as opposed to going and renting a DVD or whatever it might be these days. And I think that is something we have to think about as part of our story, as part of our pitch. How can we help non-technical audiences, especially those who have the money, the decision makers, to really understand this and relate to it? So with James's response, did what he just said, did that necessarily lead to funding commitments?
Not necessarily. This requires conversations around hard dollars saved by the replacement and ongoing support of traditional hardware and the clear advantages of a concurrent and support inclusive licensing model, such as that offered by Apporto.
And the follow-up to that is, it was easy to obtain funding during COVID-19, especially if it was a public university. There was just a lot of money. Now, emergency funding was used, but now that we're post that phase of funding, how is Emory University, how is James really getting continued funding?
There are a distinct differentiation in the types of funding that were available during the COVID pandemic, which centered around business continuity versus the justification of investments built around ROI. Over the course of the pandemic, as it turns out, our investment in virtual desktops has not only permitted us traverse the challenge of offering lab functionality remotely, but also enabled us to enjoy significant ROI through the permanent decommissioning of our on-campus physical computer labs.
Thank you. Fernando, as a faculty member, you don't have much say necessarily in how your college's budget is spent, or maybe you do. So help us understand, what's the process when a faculty member says and finds out this is really important for our students? How do you then get from that point to getting your dean or your provost to say, okay, we're going to fund it?
Well, let me start by just saying that we are witnessing a massive disruption of in the way the students see the value they're receiving from their college education. So students have gotten used to the fact that they can take classes online from the comfort of their beds, maybe their PJs, right? Yet some of the campuses are still thinking we got to bring the students back. So, the students are still hoping that they can do this online education forever, especially for non-traditional students, right? So they know they can go anywhere in the US and take the classes. Maybe they take an easier professor and they can avoid me, for example. So what we need to start thinking is, how do we elevate our infrastructure to be able to serve the needs of those that want that flexibility, right? Through high flex courses, online courses, et cetera. And if we don't do that, if we invest everything on the brick and mortar resources at our universities, we're going to be competing with universities that are thousands of miles away from us. So from the faculty perspective, there is a shared governance model at a university, which can be very slow. So, if I have gone through this, I serve in the strategic planning committee for the Craig School of Business, and fortunately, I've been able to voice my 2 cents and my perspective, I should say, on how important it is to make sure that we have tools like this available for our students. But that's not always the case in every campus. So my recommendation for those of you that are considering this type of resource is to get a small group of faculty members that have an immediate need on how they can apply this tool. Because there's going to be a few members who are willing to do a bit extra because they actually care about their students, right? Some of them have been so overwhelmed with the transition from being able to teach everything from a PowerPoint and just in front of every student to having to learn how to use Zoom and every other tool that has been thrown at us. So you may not have a lot of participation from the faculty side. So you really need to focus on those that would benefit tremendously immediately. So you got to look for those computer science, technology classes, etc., and then take it from there, because those are the classes that are going to be using the labs, your stats courses, your videographers, the faculty members that require those kinds of resources. So that is my recommendation. Start small with a faculty member for a semester so they can give you all their feedback, and then support the rest, and everybody else would follow. I mean, I still have a couple of my peers that are discovering Apporto, and they're finding out how easy it can be to roll out their resources. But at first, you're always going to have a few faculty members that may not be interested in doing extra work. So just follow that advice. I hope
Thank you, Fernando. Yeah, and as in my old CIO role, let me share a small little insight. Usually, and I kind of put this in quotes right now, usually the CIO does have some discretionary funding. And just keeping in mind, permanent funding is always the hardest part of funding anything sustainably, but one-time funding. So if it's an ask of, can we try this for a year, maybe 2 years, and especially if the dollar amount is reasonable, the CIO usually has some amount of discretionary funding where if you got a good relationship, or if you don't, build one. If you're a faculty member, if you're a provost, if you're someone, ask. If you don't ask, you'll never know. And the CIO has possibilities to ask other people, like the CFO or the provost or deans. And so usually there's some earmarked money that's possible, especially one time. And I would suggest also just having a conversation with your industry partners, whichever direction you're looking at. Apporto is a really great in terms of building partnerships with higher ed. They listen. Apporto listens so well. And that's why at Fresno State, we started with a pilot. And that helped really for us to understand how this might work and what are the pain points that we might have. So Chris, if you can briefly tell me about, in the same kind of manner of helping decision makers understand the value, I know that you conducted some feedback and some satisfaction. Can you just briefly, maybe we won't share the slides here, but talk through the insights you found from looking at the feedback from students and faculty?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that we do just to make sure, that the service that we're providing is being used and it's serving its purpose and users are happy with it. So we definitely conduct surveys to all our users, or at least the users that have logged into Apporto. Some of the things that we look for is, how's the performance? How's the ease of use, the satisfaction that the users have, the device compatibility, the available apps. Security is a question we also ask, and then user experience, technical support, and then we ask them overall in terms of how they feel about the service. And from 1 year to the other, we saw improvement. It's rating from 1 to 5, 1 being poor, 5 being excellent. And we improved 4.02 to 4.3 from one semester to the other. And we're hoping that, it's a mixture of a lot of things. And it's not just Apporto, but from our side as well, in terms of how we convey the use of Apporto and also promote the training and support our faculty and students.
Thank you, Chris. Generally speaking, as I saw those results come out and year over year, semester over semester, it's really helpful to see that first there's an improvement. Any technology rollout, there's bound to be some bumps in the road. And so, Fernando, I want to say thank you, because you were honest and your students were honest to say, well, it could be better. And this is what's the pain points that are going on. And as we looked into the reasons, we wanted to isolate, is that because of the network or the infrastructure or the latency of using hotspots? And it could have been all the above. And to figure out then, okay, well, what can we improve with the actual experience of the tool? All that is super helpful. So my advice to our participants, ask for feedback and be ready to hear some tough things, but at the same time, be willing to just dig in to understand what's the root cause, and then can something be done about it? And most likely, probably yes, for most cases. I wanted to move us on because we are running short on time. So let's go back to James, first of all. For James, on our written response, what have been the most pleasant experiences or insights related to Apporto virtual computer labs in the perspective of students and faculty?
Further to the point regarding flexibility, our students have immensely appreciated the option of meeting the demands of their academic and lab-reliant responsibilities from any location of their choosing.
And then let me ask, with James's response to the next question, what insights or recommendations can you share with our webinar participants today related to sharing about the various uses and benefits with various campus constituents?
In addition to the previous points mentioned about ROI, it's important for customers on Constitutes to understand that the virtualized environments of today are vastly superior to the experiences of 5 to 10 years ago. Bandwidth needs are reduced, specialized client installations are a relic of the past, and the user experience, including serviceability, responsiveness, and replication of a true desktop environment, are worthy of consideration as a forward-thinking strategy for academic computing.
Thank you, Connie. I want to acknowledge a question in the chat in a kind of an ongoing discussion from Jamal. There's a question about the support of augmented technology, and that's probably a feature question that we'll have to take offline, but there's a lot in development to support teaching and learning using USB connected devices, for example, or what do you do with applications that require cloud-based mounting or even hard drives and large sets of data. Those are all great questions, but I'm going to defer to the Apporto team because, and we'll have to take that offline. We want to focus more on the return on investment and value statements. But there's definitely there is a value statement there, which is Apporto works very closely with its customers and even prospective customers to try to help realize true value that I've seen much more than any of the other tools out there that are more based on just providing you the infrastructure. Fernando, can you help answer the question about pleasant experiences or insights using Apporto from your students and from other faculty, and combining that with the second part, the second question, insights and recommendations that you might also want to share with our webinar participants today about sharing the value with campus constituents?
Well, thank you all for the time of being able to share these thoughts with you. From the student's perspective, I can tell you the smiles are countless, right? Not from not having access at all to being able to access some of the software from their mobile devices has been tremendous. We do have a program here at Fresno State that provides students with tablets if they require that, and they've been able to use sophisticated software to be able to be included in the class. From the faculty perspective, I'll say that you're saving a lot of time, and my peers are delighted at the fact that they can actually look at their students as they take their exams, right? So they're actually seeing what kind of resources are opening. So, there's a huge wave of discussion on academic integrity that will please a lot of faculty members. I know you're not recording them, their physical presence, but the actual activities in the computer do matter. And that, the puzzle look that you get from the students that were thinking they could use resources has been really useful. And I think at the end of the day, the inclusivity of those students that don't have the resources or the ability to come to campus is the big win here.
Thank you so much. And Chris, if you can, in a minute or so, how about your perspectives, especially from supporting the technology, supporting people, supporting faculty and students? What are the insights that you've noticed, and how would you support our webinar participants in advocating for it and speaking with their campus constituents?
Yeah, definitely. Communication is number one. Being able to communicate with all the major groups that are faculty side as well as student side, working with your instructional designers and making sure they're on the same page as technology services, and working with your student bodies to make sure that they're able to convey that message that this service is available for the students. So that is one aspect, and then the other aspect is working with your technology services team and making sure you have a workflow when students and faculty request service. That workflow should be efficient so it gets to the right people. Thank you.
Chris and Fernando and James, if you're listening to this, James, on the recorded version, thank you so much for offering your time today. There's so much other information we'd like to share with you. We are at the end of our hour. If you want to stay on with other questions, you're welcome to do that. But I do want to share there's spreadsheets that are available to literally calculate the hard dollars of potential savings or at least potential cost diversion. But there's a lot of things we can't document in the spreadsheet because they're about student success, or they're about students who had no other choice, or they're busy working, or they're needing to access the lab to finish their assignment, but there's no physical lab. We can't document the cost savings there or the value there, but we can try to understand that, so that when we're trying to convey these messages with other students, with faculty, with our provosts and deans, that I want you to be prepared to do so. So feel free to reach out to the Apporto team, to reach out to me, and I won't volunteer Chris and Fernando's time, but if you wanted to reach out to them, please send them a message right now via chat or look them up and reach out, because they have provided such valuable time and insight into this whole process. So thank you so much for participating today. We're gonna stay on the line for maybe a minute or two in case anyone has questions or other thoughts. Thank you so much, and I wish you a good day.